Hello, I'm Angela Rice Beamer, and this program is called Chautauqua. Chautauqua is a living history humanities program where scholars and actors dress in full costume to portray famous people in history. Our theme is Sporting Lives, and tonight it features the life and accomplishments of an Olympic gold medalist who was a champion in sports from football to ballroom dancing. Tonight's Chautauqua character is the All-American sports legend, Jim Thorpe.
Those contests were truly a challenge. I can remember the very first one was a short distance, 200 meters. I thought I could take that. But you know, I took it by less than a second. There were 164 American athletes, of which we were so proud. It was the first time that athletes came from America, from all the different kinds of people, racial, economic, what have you. And the number 2 and the number 3 runners-up were Americans. It was a great moment. And the second event, it was the javelin throw. And you know, we did not have javelins to practice with at Carlisle. When I did my javelin throw, I didn't realize you could take several steps, so I just took a couple and let it go for all it was worth. It wasn't worth very much. I came in number 3, I think. The one who won that was a proud Norwegian named Hugo Wieslander. It was a great moment for Hugo, but I didn't relish losing, and it was going to be the last great moment as far as I was concerned for Hugo. And so the third contest was the running broad jump. I watched Hugo, and I was very glad that he got to go first. One of my secrets was to always observe your competitor, and after he does his thing, try to do him one better. I didn't care about records. I just wanted to win over my nearest competitor. And you know, when Hugo jumped, he jumped and went over 22 feet 5 inches. And back then my eyes were better. I could see where the 23-foot mark was. And so when I ran, I concentrated, get past that 23. And guess what? I did it. And so I won the running broad jump. There were other contests, the discus. And then the final for the pentathlon was the 1,500 meter run. Now, the Europeans said the Americans could not win a pentathlon because, you see, for a couple reasons. Number one, Americans were specialists. They could do one thing well, but not more than that. And therefore, it would be a European champion, preferably a Scandinavian one, that would win the pentathlon. That's what they predicted. And after it was all over, I think they blamed the weather because it was so hot. If we had lost, I suppose we would have blamed the long voyage from America because half of us were seasick still. But you know, I was fortunate to win the pentathlon. When the decathlon was held, we did more, some of the same and then more. I can remember running the long and running the short. I did well. Throwing the discus and the shot put, I did well enough. And then, you know, on the morning of the last day of the decathlon, I looked for my shoes and they were gone. How do you compete barefooted? How do you compete in an athletic contest without athletic shoes? And so I asked my teammates if they had seen them. Oh no, I finally asked the coach. I thought he was going to blow a gasket. After he calmed down, he said, "Go borrow some." And I managed to find one shoe that was a little too small. I could barely get my foot in there. And the other shoe, don't tell the coach, I pulled out of a barrel at the back of the contest. And it was too big. So if you look at my photographs, you'll see one of my photographs at the 1912 Olympics, where I am standing like this, and if you notice my shoes, they're mismatched. One of them is noticeably larger. One of them has a couple of extra socks stuffed in, just so I could run. But when I ran that race, I ran like there was no tomorrow. And they said, "Oh, Thorpe, he's going to be fatigued. He's going to be too tired to make two contests, grueling contests, like the pentathlon, and the decathlon's even bigger." I beat my time by 4 seconds. And that was some of the things that happened. After the games were over, my buddies invited me to go to a Stockholm saloon. I wasn't that thirsty, but I was curious. What would a Stockholm saloon look like? And as we went inside, I found out some of the boys were already in there. They were in there and they were betting. They were betting on who could jump the highest. Now, they had a pretty good thing going. They say I saw finally, they had a hat over to one side with money stuffed in it. They called that the kitty for some reason. And I said, "What's going on here?" They say, "We're going to jump up. One of us is going to win the kitty." "Well, what are you jumping at?" He says, "Look." Sure enough, way up there was a chandelier. I don't know how high it was, but it was high. And I stood back and watched. They said, "Thorpe, you going to join in?" I said, "Maybe." And time after time after time, they jumped. Couldn't reach it. I put some money in the kitty. And finally, I went and ran and did a flying leap. Not only did I touch the chandelier, I grabbed a hold of it. I was lucky that it didn't come down crashing with me down on the floor. Those were great days. And other Americans distinguished themselves in the 1912 Olympics from all over America. I can remember we had a swimmer from Hawaii. Well, we had a New York City policeman, who was great with the hammer and the shot put. We had one little guy on the Carlisle Indians Olympic team, a buddy of mine, Hopi from Arizona, named Louis Tuanima. When Louis first approached Coach Warner, Coach Warner was not very polite. He says, "What are you doing here?" And Louis says, "Me run. Good fast." He was a man of few words, but he was a man of many, many, many miles. Because had Louis ever entered the marathon, they didn't have one as such that year. They had a 20-mile run, but not a 25. And sure enough, when we put the Hopi boy into the long-distance run, he came in second. Smiling Hannes from Finland won the gold medal for the long, long, long distance run. But I want to tell you that the crowd of 30,000 gave me and gave little Louis Tuanima, a standing ovation because of the spirit of that young man. When I was born, my mother gave me my Indian name. She called me Wathohawk. And I cannot tell you how many mothers gave their sons names. I'm sure they gave a lot of their daughters names. But I like to think that it was usually the father that gave the name to the son. But I never complained because Wathohuk, I thought, was a downright super name. It meant bright path. And don't get me wrong, it was not the kind of bright path that you find where the sunbeams come down and illumine your way. Oh no. It's the kind of bright path when you're alone at night in the dark. And there is a path that you must follow, because if you stray, you may be in danger. And above, you hear the thunder, and then a lightning bolt strikes somewhere, and suddenly night becomes day. Your pathway is clear as to where you must go. That is the kind of bright path that Wathohuk signifies. I had a wonderful childhood, all 5 years of it. Can you imagine sending your boys, me and my twin brother Charlie, to school, boarding school, away from the home at 6 years of age? I didn't like it. I didn't like it for a lot of reasons. First of all, it wasn't any fun. Number two, I knew English, but those teachers, they were severe. Number three, the subjects were boring. Number four, well, what I would rather do is go hunting and swimming and riding the horses. I'd even rather work than go to school. If it weren't for my brother, Charlie, I probably wouldn't have learned the first 2 lessons. But he helped me in a lot of things. The food was awful. In boarding school, you're supposed to encourage the children with good food. Instead, for breakfast every morning, we got the most, oatmeal with coffee. I think it was Army surplus. For lunch, we had potatoes and bread, no butter. And for supper, we had hominy, and once in a while, what we like to call mystery meat, because none of us could figure out what it was. On Sunday, we had a little cake of barley with a drop of honey, I think, to make it a little sweet. So the food wasn't much to write home about. I ran away. Especially, I started running away when my brother died. He was only 8 years old. And a light went out in my life. It was one of the first sad things that I can remember. Later, people asked me what gave me my strength. Because my father, Hiram, was a titan. He could out-wrestle, out-run, out-climb, out-ride, out-slug any man in the county, red man or white. But you know, I always told them that I got my strength from my brother Charlie, because when he passed on, I felt some extra strength come my way. I finally got tired of getting beat up, and I think my father got tired of beating me up. Hickory switch or willow switch, those things don't feel any good. And finally, I said, I don't want to go to school no more. He says, you don't want to go to school anymore. And guess what? I'm taking you. In fact, I've got a better idea. I'm sending you 270 miles away to Haskell College in Kansas. You can't run away, boy. It's too far for you to run. I was there from the time I was 11 until almost 13. And one day, a letter came that said my dad had been shot by accident in a hunting incident and might not live. I didn't go back to my room. I did not pack anything for the trip. I just struck out. It took me 2 weeks to get home. When I got home, Pa was waiting for me on the front porch with a willow in his hand. Apparently, he heard I was coming. He wore me out. And because of that, I stayed only a short while before I went to Texas for a year. I learned to be a cowboy when I was only 13. I could manage horses with the best of them. In fact, after a year of doing cowboy stuff in the Texas Panhandle, I came back to Oklahoma with 2 horses and gave them both to Pa. He was so pleased and proud and needed some help on the farm, so he let me stay for another couple of years. I was able to go to a local school called Garden Grove, but an amazing thing happened. A recruiter from an Indian school, the most famous of all Indian schools, came to Garden Grove, Oklahoma. And this man talked to my pa, and this man talked to the principal. He says, do you have any young men here that are Indian? Because it was both red and white students in that school. He says, do you have anyone that has promise or at least a desire to be an athlete? He says, we might have one. His name is Jim. And he talked to me. I said, I would love to go to Carlisle. I had reason to want to be an athlete. I had seen the football team when they came to Haskell. And to be honest with you, I thought there might be some future there. And so I went to Carlisle. 1904. Less than 2 months later, Pa died. Ma had passed away even before I left Oklahoma. So, losing my brother, losing my ma, losing my pa. 3 lights had gone out in my life. So as many shadows were on my path as there was brightness, I felt. But you know, from the time I got to Carlisle, some amazing things started to happen. For one thing, the food got better. At Haskell, we had the same food that we did in Oklahoma, only more of it. There were nights that we went hungry down in Oklahoma. I knew that we would never go hungry as long as Ma and Pa were cooking. But at Carlisle, the food was a little better. And for athletes, the food was out of this world. Because Coach Warner, he found a way to bring in ticket sales from the athletic games and put it into a special fund. And for every athlete on the track team, for every athlete on the football team, a dormitory was prepared with a kitchen. And now for the first time since I'd sat at my Ma and Pa's table, I could eat good. He said, these boys got to have some meat on them if they're going to compete in the big time. And I think he was right. He was right. Before long, I was beginning to try out some different things. They were surprised and amazed when the day came in 2007. I saw some fellows trying to jump over a high bar. None of them were getting over it. It was set at 5 foot 9 inches. I said, do you mind if I try? He says, well, we're quitting. He says, but you go ahead. I guess you think you can do better. I cleared it with inches to spare. And I said, I guess the laugh's on you. And I went on my way. The next day, word came, you're to report to the coach, Jim. Oh, goodness, what have I done? I went and saw the coach. I said, yes, sir. He says, do you know what you've done? Nothing bad, I hope. Nothing bad? You've only beaten the school record. Go get a suit of athletic uniform, and you're on the team now. When I started playing football, I got a hold of a football, and we were playing just one shop against the next. Sometimes it was the carpenters versus the bakers. Sometimes it was the gardeners versus the tailors. And we all took turns. But the time came when I approached the coach. I said, I want to do more than track. I want to play football. He says, well, go ahead, you can kick it, but don't do anything more than that. I don't want you getting hurt. I cannot stand the loss of my star track man. I didn't care about that. I wanted to play football. And so it was that I said, I want to play football, coach. He said, okay, fellas, snap here. He called all the guys together, 40 of them, which was more football players than I think we ever had before or since. And back then, Indian Field at Carlisle was set up as a gridiron. Football began with everything blocked off in squares like you'd cook on a griddle, all right? And he says, now, each of you guys take your positions. And 40 guys took their positions for tackling practice. Guess who was going to be the tacklee? You got it. But I took that football, and I started running, and I dodged, and I started, and I went this way, and I cut through that way, and I got past all 40 of them because they had never seen such a fast Indian. Do you think the coach was pleased? Not a bit. He was beet red. I thought he was going to blow a gasket. And he threw that football at me. He says, now, Thorpe, he says, you go through those guys, and don't be a sissy about it. Don't dodge them. Just meet them man to man. This is supposed to be tackling practice. That time I ran, I did not dodge all of them that time. And when I looked behind me for the first of other occasions, it looked like trees fallen in the wake of a tornado. Because I did not want to be tackled. I tossed the football back to Coach Warner. I said, nobody tackles Jim. And I heard what the coach said to the assistant coach. He says, that sure is some wild Indian, isn't he? We started playing teams. Now, before we could play the big boys, which was the Ivy League, Princeton, Yale, Harvard, University of Penn at Philadelphia, and so forth, we had to promise the superintendent two things. He says, every one of you young men that wants to play football, and let me say this before I talk about the promises. It was a dangerous sport. I got there in 1904. I got on the team in 1907. That was my first season. Do you realize in 1906 there were 18 fatalities and over 150 young men put in hospitals that season of football in 06. 07, when I started, there were 21 fatalities and again over 150 in hospitalizations. We came this close to having college football canceled, annulled, banned from every college campus in the United States. There were a couple of teams that officially went to rugby. And so it was a violent sport. The idea was two teams smashing head-on together as brutal and as violent force as possible from the greatest distance. And from the greatest distance, you know, when they got up their speed, they were going to knock somebody down and break some bones. The two promises. First, we had to promise that we would not slug, no matter who slugged us or how hard. That was a tough promise to keep. And most of us managed to keep it. The second promise was that we would win against any team and every team that we encountered. Our spokesman said, we will try. And Colonel Pratt says, nothing doing. I don't want you to try. I want you to win. And that's the only promise that I will accept. And so they said, we promise. And in the years that followed, in 1907, I got my first touchdown. In 1908, we defeated Navy at Annapolis. In 1907, we beat Harvard for the first time after losing 10 consecutive years. In those days, we encountered teams that utilized racial slurs. We encountered teams that were so violent that after beating up on some of my poor buddies, they said, who's the savage now? And we encountered teams that were such big guys, 4, 5 inches taller than we were on average and 20 to 25 pounds heavier. How do you take a team of ultimate underdogs of the Carlisle Indians, drawn from 100 different tribes of Native Americans who are smaller and supposedly inferior, because in 1910, the superintendent of Indian education said the average Indian student is noticeably, unquestionably inferior to his white counterpart. They do not have the coordination. They do not have the ability of strength and of athletic ability to compete on an even terms. But guess what happened? These Carlisle Indians, led by my coach, Coach Warner, changed a team that was of mixed material into a most effective strike force of athletic marvels. We were fast. We were so fast that no one could catch us. They couldn't block us because they got there too late. We ran circles, literally, around some of them. And we tried something new. We invented, or at least I'll say, perfected, the forward pass. While the other teams were lobbing and tossing the football 5 yards or maybe 10, we were making 30-yard and 40-yard passes and receptions. I have to admit, my first receptions were not good. One of my teammates says, "Thorpe, if you cannot catch that football, you must have hands like the hoofs of a deer. I'm going to put glue on your hands so you can catch it next time." Well, he didn't put glue on my hands, but I learned to catch it. And they say that I could throw as far and as accurately as anyone. And when it came to catching, they did not criticize me about dropping the ball. And they never knew whether the Indians were going to run or pass. They never knew who was carrying the ball. There were a lot of interesting things that happened. There was one time we were playing a team, and the coach had the idea, okay, after you come into the huddle, I want everybody to pretend like they've got the football, and they actually slipped the football up the back of the jersey of one of the players. And when we came out of the huddle, several of us had like this, running with as much speed and ardor as we could. The opposing team was trying to figure out which Indian to tackle. The one Indian that had it was coming down the field with his hands like this. The quarterback ignored him. The safety, the last defense, ignored him until after looking around, he saw what happened. 29,000 Harvard fans could see what was going on. They were screaming, they were hollering, and the Harvard boys thought they were just excited over their performance. It was glorious. It was our first win over Harvard. But they said it was won by a trick. Well, the score proved that that wasn't true. But it took another couple of years before we got another win over Harvard. I can remember the day we played Syracuse. Those Syracuse guys looked like giants. They were really, really big guys. And the news reporters, today what we would call propagandists, they said that Syracuse was certain to win. Our coach agreed. He was very clever. He said, "You're right. My Indian boys are worn out, injured. They've got all the fight taken out of them. They're all beat up from the last games. We don't hardly stand a chance." And the Syracuse guys thought they were going to have a field day. During the practice, just before the game, we were hardly tossing the ball. Almost every one of us had bandages on over our head. Some of our arms were wrapped up, the legs. A couple of guys had splints on their legs. We looked like an old folks' home of Indians trying to play football. But you know, when the game started, we pulled off our bandages. And we tore into those Syracuse Giants and threw them and around them in such a manner that we shut them out, 12-0. In October of 1911, they said I did something that had never been seen before. Now, back in those days, when you punted the football, you kicked it to the opposite side, right? And they were supposed to catch it and hopefully make some yardage downfield. There was a rule that permitted either side, if they got to the football first, to field the ball. They could play. They could put it in play if either side got it. I did something that had never been done before, mostly because I guess no one ever thought of it, or maybe they just weren't fast enough. When I punted the ball, it went way high up into the air and a pretty good distance. They made a mistake, the Pittsburghers. They blocked every one of my buddies but me. I ran down that field so fast, I ran for all I was worth. There were 3 Pittsburgh players ready to make the interception of that football, and they were good players. They jumped high. I jumped higher. Not only did I catch my own punt, I think the term is pirouetted. I broke through the tackle of 3 Pittsburghers and made it 20 yards more for the touchdown. I think they will remember that. When we played Harvard that year, I wanted to prove, and every Indian boy on the team wanted to prove that what an Indian could do. The very last words, my father. He says, "Go show what an Indian can do." We all wanted to do that. And you know, Carlisle was established with the idea of taking our Indian identity away from us. Colonel Pratt said that he would kill the Indian and save the boy or the girl. And so it was that we were supposed to lose our Indian identity. Our names were changed. We were given some very funny names. If you think our names before were funny, you should have seen them afterwards. But they did something at Carlisle that they didn't expect. They united the Indian boys and girls that went there. And for the athletes, Coach Warner said he wanted us to keep our Indian names because it made us seem more fierce, more threatening, more unexpected. And so on the 11th day of the 11th month of the 11th year, we played good old Harvard. The Harvard boys were so proud. I never could say it the way they could, but they always told us they could play in Harvard style, which meant that they could win with great success and do it with superior sportsmanship. And so it was that we played them such a hard game, it was right nose to nose. The tie was scored. And toward the end of the game, my roommate, who was the quarterback, Gus Welch, he says, "Jim, I want you to kick a field goal from here." I says, "People don't kick field goals from the 48-yard line." He says, "You can do it." And there was something in his eye that told me I just might pull it off. So they took the snap, I came forward, and I kicked. My leg was all bandaged up. I had a cast up to here. I wasn't playing very good that day. And I knew if I missed that kick, well, we might lose. At best, we were going to tie. But somebody was with me. And my foot connected so true to that football that it soared like it was a rocket. And it went through the goalposts. We won against Harvard. Now, the next year, we took on our most fearsome and our most intimidating opponent, West Point. They had a player at West Point named Dwight David Eisenhower. Now, Eisenhower was a very serious opponent. What he lacked in speed, or agility, he more than made up for in determination, aggressiveness, and ruthlessness. And early in the game, this was at West Point, early in the game, the Army scored a touchdown. They fired their cannon, boom. There was more smoke that came out of that cannon than a room full of newspaper reporters. And what a celebration they had over that one touchdown. They missed the extra point. Well, we came back and scored a touchdown of our own. By the third quarter, we were leading the game, and Eisenhower was getting worried. He had a slogan, "I will put the fear of Eisenhower into the opposing team," he liked to say. But he was real smart. He had teamwork like you would not believe. And he had a couple of buddies. One was Leland Hobbs. He says, "Hobbs, we're going to take out Thorpe. If we take out Thorpe, we can take out the rest of the Indians real easy." Well, how do you recommend we do that? Give them the old 1-2. Now, the 1-2 is where one tackle comes flying at your legs and the other tackle comes flying at your chest. They both land simultaneously or anywhere near that, and you're going to bring down the man. Sure enough, it worked. I had the breath knocked out of me. The wind was just not there. I was laying on the field. The coach came out. I don't know how long it was, maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. Finally, the referee came over and says, "Coach, get your man off the field. We got to go on with the next play." And that's when Leland DeVore, who was one of the great cadets, intervened. I believe he was a quarterback that year. He says, "Oh, now's bells, referee. We don't stand on technicality. Give him all the time he needs." I did not need any sympathy. I did not need any help from an Army cadet. And they say that I jumped off of that green grass like I was coming out of a trampoline. I said, "I'm okay. Let's go on and play." The next time they tried the old 1-2 on me, they were coming charging, one from each different direction. Here was Eisenhower. Oh, he's looking pretty mean. And here comes another guy. This guy is Charlie Benedict. And Benedict, he's coming full throttle too. They're like two charging locomotives. And just before they got to me to take me down and maybe put me in the hospital, I did the start-stop. So I stopped and stepped and kind of twisted. And in the plains warfare and hunting experience of the Indians, it reminded me, I was thinking about the buffalo. Now, those of you who have been out buffalo hunting know this story already, that the pony is very fast. In fact, the pony is faster than the buffalo, but although the pony can run faster than the buffalo can stop faster than the pony. So whenever you're out buffalo hunting, be very careful. Don't get too close to the buffalo, because all that buffalo has to do is put down his mighty hoofs at the right moment, like super brakes, and hook his horns around and just knock that horse to the ground. Once the horse goes to the ground, the rider is finished with all the other charging buffalo around. So I stopped, and those two guys, Eisenhower and Benedict, they collided like two freight trains. I was already on my way to the goal line. When the coach saw what bad shape they were in, he saw they were very woozy. He said, "You guys go on to the shower. Don't even stay at the bench. Go on to the shower." And they were taken out of the game. We beat Army better than we beat Navy. We had defeated Annapolis, the midshipmen, 16-6. We beat Army 26-6. And it was another glorious day. Well, after that, there was a ruckus over my medals, and my medals were taken away over, they said, professional status. And I have said most of what I need to say about that. But I will tell you this, that if the teams I played with in North Carolina, the Rocky Mount Railroaders and the Highlanders of Fayetteville, if they were professional teams, well, I'm a monkey's uncle. because first of all, the Rocky Mountain Railroaders disbanded before the end of the season. And everybody knows that the Highlanders were so small potatoes that people stopped coming to see us play. So those were not professional teams, in my humble estimation. I got married in 1913, right after I got out of Carlisle. A beautiful girl, Iva Margaret Miller. We had a little boy, looked just like me. It broke my heart when I lost little Jim 3 years later. He was my image. Never have gotten over that. They say that although we had 3 daughters, Gail, Charlotte, and Grace, that the loss of little Jim, along with some drinks I took, led to our divorce in 1923. But you know, life goes on. I had some successes in pro football before I got married again. In pro baseball also, I got on with the New York Giants. About the same time that the boys were going over there to Europe, American Indians weren't citizens until 1924. I didn't feel any particular reason to go look at the Kaiser. Therefore, I had already gotten a contract to play baseball with the New York Giants. I had 3 great years with the Giants. We were champions. We were champions until the day when the manager, who was a short little Irishman named McGraw, John McGraw, when he wasn't looking, people called him Muggsy. And Muggsy was all business. He was never encouraging to me. In fact, he was always trying to tell me I was doing stuff wrong. And so one day, when I missed one of his signals, and I guess we lost a run, he said that I was a dumb Indian. I never liked those words. And so I took off after him. I wanted to teach him a lesson. I didn't care who he was. And even though I was an Olympic track star, he stayed ahead of me a good ways down the road. I didn't know how he ran that fast. But I caught him. I finally caught him. And just as I was shaking him, the other teammates pulled me off. The next day, he said I was off the team. He said that the reason I was dismissed from the New York Giants was because I couldn't hit a curveball. That's ridiculous. My daughter Grace would say it was preposterous. But there were other writers that took that and put it in the newspaper that Thorpe was cashiered because he couldn't hit a curveball. And to this day, there's some people that believe that. Ridiculous. Well, I got married again. And this time, I married a very nice girl, like the first time. And we had 4 sons. First time around, 1 son I lost, and then the 3 girls. Second time was hopefully going to work out a little better. Carl Phillip, John, who they called Jack, Richard, and William. And I love to play ball with my boys. It was just one of those things. Frida and I broke up after 15 years. So the first marriage, 10 years. Second marriage, 15 years. People said that I was gone too much. But you have to understand that in the way of the American Indian, many of the men gone for hunts at extended periods of time. I really didn't think I had to come back home every night. But I guess my wife did. I got married the 3rd time to Patricia Askew, and she's still with me. She is such a hard charger. She organized my life for a good. And you know, in the days after I retired, 1929, the same time as the Depression was about to break out, I did a lot of things, from painting houses to being night watchman. Finally, I got into the movies. And let me tell you 1 or 2 stories before I wrap this up. How many of you may remember a television series called I Love Lucy? Do you remember I Love Lucy? Okay, I watched every one of those things. Okay, there was a Fred Mertz whose real name was Bill Bill Frawley. Bill Frawley and I were working on a movie set, and we got to be buddies. And so Fred, or Bill, he noticed out in the foyer, just around the corner, there were some young men that were also hired to star in the picture, and they were doing the broad jump from a standing position. So, from your feet together, jump as far as you can, and some of these guys were going 10 foot. Well, as American young men will do, they got a kitty going. And they said, okay, whoever gets the farthest will get the kitty. And they started putting money in there. Bill saw that, and he came to me. He says, hey, Jim, you want to have some fun? I said, why not? Who doesn't? He says, how about you joining in this contest? It's just a standing broad jump. Do you think you can take them? I'll give it a whirl. And so he went and he talked to the boys. He says, hey, I got a 50-year-old man over here who thinks that he can out-jump you. And what do you say? Will you give him a shot? Oh, yeah. Bring in the old geezer. We'll take his money. So I came in. I took off my feathers because we were about to shoot the picture. But I left on my moccasins. And when I jumped 10 foot 8 inches and took the money home. Now, I just want to tell you one more story. I appreciate your patience. But this story has to do with the movie industry. I was the one that was the first to insist that the Hollywood producers and directors get Native Americans, get real American Indians to play the roles of American Indians. It's really a non-brainer, right? And so it was, they started using more Indians. First they paid them half of what they paid the other people. Eventually they paid them more. But in almost every one of those motion pictures, it showed a stereotypical Indian that was either lazy or dumb or pitiful or, well, worse. Except for one. One time the Indians were permitted to win. It was called They Died with Their Boots On. And the star of that movie was a man who had a personality who I think must have been very much like that of George Armstrong Custer, Errol Flynn. Now, Errol Flynn, he put on his fancy buckskin and his cavalry trousers with the yellow stripes down the legs, and he thought he was something else. He saw me showing a trick that I was just now teaching some of the other young people. I held out a sledgehammer, and this sledgehammer I would tilt it toward my head and touch my nose, and then bring it back up straight again. And Flynn says, that's not anything special. I can do that. And before anybody could stop him or warn him, he grabbed my sledgehammer. And when he tried to do it, he got a big knot on his forehead. Later that day, he went over to the canteen and ordered a couple of beers. And I tried to go over and tell him I was sorry for what happened to him. But apparently, he didn't want my sympathy. Instead, he tried to pick a fight. Do you know that Errol Flynn took a swing at me? He missed. But I didn't. I popped him a good one and left him on the floor. And when I did, I said, Custer was weak too. Now it is time for me to go on another path. I have other things to do, but I want to thank you for your friendship. I want to thank you for your time. And I wish for you, my friends, that your path may always be bright.
We've just seen a wonderful performance of Jim Thorpe by Mark McGehee. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm delighted to be here.
I really enjoyed the performance. What do you think Jim Thorpe's proudest achievement was?
Well, he himself once declared that the proudest day of his life was when he won the 2 gold medals, one for the pentathlon, one for the decathlon in the 1912 Olympics. Something about the crowd, something about the King of Sweden, something about the fact that he had achieved something for all Americans, and particularly for the American Indian.
Right, and it was an international event, so he had that international recognition.
That's right. So many people back in the States, regardless of their race, regardless of their economic status or income, could look at his example as a role model and say, if he can do it, I can do it too.
So that inspirational aspect was there for others.
I think that was part of it.
Mm-hmm. What do you think was his uniqueness?
Well, his uniqueness to me was that he combined both worlds, both the Native American world and the white man's world. He was a product of a racial mix and a cultural mix that had the best of both worlds. His mom and dad insisted on him getting a good education to be able to compete in the white man's world. At the same time, they taught him to value and to honor all of his tribal traditions.
And he kept that throughout his life?
He did.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but he always was very, very down to earth, very humble. He never forgot his roots. He always came back to Oklahoma. He came back to see his family. He came back to work at his sister's farm and that of his brother from time to time, even into his later years.
He was a celebrity. How did he handle that success, and did he face some difficulties because of the celebrity?
When he was younger, especially as he started becoming a famous celebrity, he was at first very shy. And there were times, like in the parade in New York City, the ticker tape parade coming back from the 1912 Olympics. In the movie with Burt Lancaster, Jim Thorpe All-American, it shows him riding proudly and waving and giving recognition to the crowd. The truth was, he had his straw hat sort of pulled down to his ears, and he didn't want that attention. He just didn't care for that attention. And he never was one to really bask in the limelight. He appreciated the friendship, and he appreciated the camaraderie of fellow athletes, and he appreciated the goodwill of a friend whenever he made one.
Conversely to the success, how did he feel about having to give the medals back?
He was sorry. He was very sad to have to do that. He felt that he had won them fair and square. So many of his teammates said that, and when Coach Pop Warner advised him finally to give them back, he says, Jim, he says, I think that you'll find that once this goes and plays itself out fully, that you will see how many Americans, by and large, support you. They're not going to blame you for breaking some rule that most people never even heard about or will care about. The verdict of history will be in your favor.
And it was. It ultimately was.
That's right.
It must be a real responsibility to carry the responsibility of portraying a character that we don't see all of the time, to get it right, to bring it to a larger audience.
I am very honored. I am just so privileged to be able to do what little I can to help portray him in a way that would do his family some honor and respect. He was such a big-hearted, such a generous, such a trusting individual. He wasn't a dummy. Some people act like that he was an easy touch when it came to asking for money and handouts. But he did have a heart as big as all outdoors. And so for me to portray that is an honor that I never dreamed of. I was asked if I would be willing to do that, and without anyone else really that I knew of that was willing to, I took a big leap of faith and I stepped forward.
Yeah, it was a leap of faith. And do you know of any other Chautauquan that's portraying him?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am.
Yeah. I was reading about Jim Thorpe, and he was famous for football and baseball and basketball, but I also heard that he won a trophy about for ballroom dancing.
That's right. He did the
Yeah.
two-step better than anybody else. In fact, that's how he won the heart of his Carlisle sweetheart, Iva Margaret Miller. She thought that he was maybe just a little bit rugged or unkempt. Maybe not entirely a polished gentleman, but when he invited her out onto the dance floor, he literally swept her off her feet.
Literally, yeah, that's good. And the other thing, he tried to do some things, even as his career was beginning to, he was having some difficulties in his career. He tried to do some things for Native American rights. He was in movies, but didn't he start a casting company?
He did. He did. Today we would call that a guild
Okay.
for professional actors. And I don't know what you could use for a gauge for success, except that, again, from those early beginnings, Hollywood began to get the idea, hey, maybe we do need to look for Native Americans to portray Native Americans. When they first started using the Native Americans that he brought forward, they would pay them half what they were paying all the other cast members. And he stepped forward, and people that don't realize what a forceful personality Thorpe had when he had a cause to fight for don't know the man, because he made it very clear, and he won their ability to get equal pay for equal time and performance. And so from those early beginnings, something finally developed into today's acceptance for Native Americans in movies and the entertainment industry.
And also the land reclamation.
That's right.
Tell us
That's
about
right.
that.
He was not a lawyer, but he had a passion for helping the American Indians reclaim so much of the land that had been taken away without thought, without due process. And he wanted to get that land back for the benefit of our American Indian people everywhere. And in that, again, he wasn't entirely successful, but he wasn't entirely unsuccessful either. Some of those things have borne fruit.
Like the things that he didn't live to see his medals restored,
That's
but
right.
they eventually were.
That's right. That's right. And so we see other cases. Let me give you one example. Among one branch of the tribe, the Fox Indians that were originally part of the Sac and Fox that went to Tama, Iowa, they were able to, by the same system that the white man prevailed in, raising money and buying money, they have established a community up there. Since then, other tribes, the Oklahoma Sac and Fox tribe, the branch up in Kansas, they have tribal programs that are model programs that benefit more of their people, I would say, I'm a member of the tribe, than I've seen elsewhere.
How did he feel about becoming an American citizen? And also I have a question, were there any Native Americans who were citizens before the law in 1924?
I've heard it said that there was citizenship offered to certain American Indians. I haven't seen that proven, but I've heard that. In 1924, the law was passed that brought the Native American community into the citizenship of the United States. I think that I've heard some of his teammates say that they were glad they weren't citizens because they didn't have to pay taxes. But I think they were sort of tongue-in-cheek. They were all, according to what I've studied about Jim, they were looking forward to the day. In fact, Thorpe later went on record as saying, the Indian is not a second-class citizen. He is not an inferior ward of the government. Give him a chance. Give him an education. Give him the same opportunity that you'll give others, and you'll see that just as in athletics that he can excel, so he will excel as a citizen.
We've got about 30 seconds left. What's next for you as a performer?
I don't know, but I've heard it said that maybe the National Museum of the American Indian would like to welcome me to give a portrayal of Jim Thorpe, or maybe the Oklahoma Historical Society back in Oklahoma. I have friends in both places, so I'm hoping that maybe at some point I can do more portrayals of Thorpe until someone better comes along.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us. You've been watching Chautauqua 2015. Our theme has been Sporting Lives. I'm Angela Rice Beamer, and for all of us here, good night.